Hey, what is going on everybody? Welcome to the channel. I'm Staves and today we're going to be breaking down the top 15 in the UFC flyweight division. Coming in at number 15 is none other than Bruno Bulldog Silva. He's a 32-year-old grappler fighting out of Brazil. Made his UFC debut in 2019 and has a current record of 13-5-2. He has 6 fights in the UFC and is currently 3-3. Bruno is on a 3-fight win streak. The Bulldog fought on the Ultimate Fighter 4 in Brazil. He has 2 notable losses to 14th ranked Tagir and 10th ranked Dvorak. Bruno Silva will be looking to ride his 3-fight win streak and hopefully make it into the top 10. The number 14th ranked fighter in the flyweight division is Tagir Ulanbekov. He's a 31-year-old grappler fighting out of Dagestan, Russia. He made his UFC debut in 2020 and has a current record of 15-2. He's had 4 fights in the UFC and is currently 3-1. He won his last fight by submission. His only loss is to 11th ranked Tim Elliott, who is a veteran. Of Tagir's 3 wins in the UFC, he has a win over 15th ranked Bruno Silva. The number 13th ranked fighter in the flyweight division is Sue the Tibetan Eagle Muderji. He's a 27-year-old striker fighting out of China. He made his UFC debut in 2018 and has a current record of 16-5. He's had 5 fights in the UFC and is 3-2. He lost his last fight to Matt Schnell, who's the 8th ranked fighter in the flyweight division, by submission. The number 12th ranked fighter in the flyweight division is none other than Muhammad the Punisher Mokaev. He's a 22-year-old fighter who comes from a wrestling background fighting out of Manchester, United Kingdom. He currently has an unbeaten record of 10-0. Mokaev has had 4 fights in the UFC, winning all 4 fights. Mokaev's last fight was against Rafael Filijo. During the fight, Mokaev was in a vicious knee bar, but managed to escape and win the fight by submission. He is looking at a prolonged injury, as he has done a lot of damage to his knee. He's got an exciting future, and is the only undefeated fighter in the flyweight rankings. The number 11th ranked fighter in the UFC's flyweight division is Tim Elliott. He's a 36-year-old freestyle fighter fighting out of the United States. He made his professional debut in 2012 and has notable fights against Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, Joseph Benavidez, Davison Figueiredo. He's currently 19-12-1 and has had 17 fights in the UFC. He's won 3 of his last 4 fights and has beaten Tagir, who is the 14th ranked fighter. The number 10th ranked fighter in the UFC flyweight division is David the Undertaker Dvorak. He's a 30-year-old MMA fighter fighting out of Chechnya. He trains in the United Kingdom. He made his UFC debut in 2020 and has a record of 20-5. He has 5 fights in the UFC and is currently 3-2. Unfortunately, the Undertaker is on a 2-fight losing streak. However, he hasn't lost to anyone outside the top 10 in the flyweight division. His losses have come to number 9th ranked Manuel Capet and 5th ranked Nikula, who we will speak about further on in the video. The 9th ranked fighter in the UFC flyweight division is Manel Capet, aka Starboy. He's a 28-year-old MMA fighter who fights out of Angola. He made his UFC debut in 2021 and has a current record of 18 wins and 6 losses. Starboy has had 5 fights in the UFC and is currently 3-2. Starboy has not lost a fight to anyone outside the top 5. He lost his UFC debut to 2nd ranked Pantoja, who was fighting for the title, and 5th ranked Nicolay. He won his last fight over 10th ranked Dvorak. The number 8th ranked fighter in the UFC flyweight division is Matt Danger Schnell. He's 33-year-old and is primarily a boxer from the United States. He made his UFC debut in 2016. He has a record of 16 wins and 7 losses. Over the last 7 years in the UFC, he's had 11 fights and has gone 5-6 in those fights. His last win was an absolute war with the Tibetan Eagle, which he won by submission, and his last loss was to 5th ranked Nicole. 3 of his 6 losses in the UFC have been to top 5 opponents. Matt Schnell is the more tenured fighter in the flyweight division, last fighting in December of 2022. The number 7 ranked fighter in the UFC flyweight division is Amir the Prince Albazi. He is a 29-year-old Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter who fights out of Baghdad, Iraq. He currently trains in Las Vegas. He has a current record of 16 wins and 1 loss and has had 4 fights in the UFC. Currently he is undefeated in the UFC, but he is yet to fight a ranked opponent. The Prince does not have a fight booked, but similar to 12th ranked Makayev, he has a very promising career. The number 6 ranked flyweight in the UFC is Alex Perez. He's a 31-year-old freestyle fighter who fights out of the United States. He made his UFC debut in 2017 and has a current record of 24 wins and 7 losses. He has had 10 fights in the UFC, and in his last 5 fights, he's gone 3-2. He's currently on a 2-fight losing streak, having lost to the number 1 ranked Davison Figueiredo and the number 2 ranked Pantoja. The number 5th ranked fighter in the UFC flyweight division is Matheus Nicolau. He's a 30-year-old boxer from Brazil and made his UFC debut in 2015. Matheus has a current record of 19 wins, 4 losses and 1 draw. He's had 9 fights in the UFC and is currently 4-1 in his last 5 fights. The number 4 ranked fighter in the UFC flyweight division is Brandon Royval, aka Raw Dog. He's a 30-year-old brawler from the United States of America. He made his UFC debut in 2020 and has a current record of 15 wins and 6 losses. He's had 7 fights in the UFC and has gone 5-2. The 3rd ranked fighter in the UFC flyweight division is Kai Kara France. He's a 29-year-old kickboxer fighting out of New Zealand. He made his UFC debut in 2018 and has a current record of 24 wins and 10 losses. He's had 10 fights in the UFC, going 6-4. His last loss was for the interim title against Brandon Moreno. The 2nd ranked fighter in the UFC flyweight division is Alexander the Cannibal Pantoja. He's a 32-year-old MMA fighter fighting out of Brazil and made his professional debut in 2017. His current record is 25-5 and he's had 12 fights in the UFC. He's gone 4-2 in his last 6 fights, beating 4th ranked Royval, 6th ranked Perez and 9th ranked Cape. In July, 2nd ranked Pantoja will fight Brandon Moreno again for his shot at the title. The number 1 contender in the flyweight division of the UFC is Davison Figueiredo. He's a 35-year-old boxer from Brazil and made his UFC debut in 2017. The former champ has a record of 21-3-1 and has had 14 fights in the UFC. He's gone 6-2-1 in his last 9 fights, and he's had 4 fights against Brandon Moreno, all for the title, in which he's gone 1-2-1. On top of his 4-fight trilogy with Brandon Moreno, he's fought UFC legends such as Joseph Benedetti. Last but not least, we have the champion, Brandon the Assassin Baby Moreno. Brandon Moreno is a 29-year-old Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter out of Tijuana, Mexico. He made his UFC debut in 2016 and is a former The Ultimate Fighter contestant. Moreno's current record is 21 wins, 6 losses and 2 draws. He's had 14 fights in the UFC and gone 7-1-2 in his last 9 fights. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Chat to you next time.